So we're just gonna, thank you for joining us today, everybody. We're just gonna give a couple of more moments. There's a bunch of people that are still joining right now, so just give us a couple of minutes or a moment or two. All right, looks like we're slowing down a little bit. All right. All right, well, I'm gonna start up here, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. I have the pleasure of having Jack Lazar with us today, and I'll just start off with a couple of things here. My name is Chris Beasy. I'm one of the tax partners here at Armanino, and I had the opportunity to meet Jack probably about 3 years ago at a restaurant in Palo Alto. And he's one of the few people that actually agreed to sit down with me. So I was really happy about that. And you know, it's interesting because every now and again you get to meet somebody that you are able to talk to, and they just captivate you so much that you want to sit there and talk to them all day. And unfortunately for me, that was not the case for Jack. But I really enjoyed talking to Jack because he was just so down to earth. And when we walk through just in just a moment some of the things that Jack has done, you're going to say to yourself, "Wow, it's pretty wild that someone can actually do that." Because I look at myself and I say, "Man, I haven't come anywhere near this." So it's pretty amazing. So just to give you a real quick background there, I want to just start by saying that Jack has over 30 years of time in Silicon Valley, which might very well be an eternity. And he has been working with companies like GoPro, Qualcomm, Atheros, Net Ratings, Aptitude, and electronics for imaging. Sorry about that. And he was on 4 of these teams, these executive teams, taking these companies public, and he was the CFO for 3 of these companies, taking them public. And there's a number of boards that Jack has been on previously as well. But I think I want to concentrate on the ones that he's on today, because we probably don't have enough time in the presentation today to go through all of them. But so currently he sits on the board of 4 publicly traded companies. We have Box, Casper Suite, Resideo, and Silicon Labs. And then he sits on the board of 3 private companies called Tonal, Untitled, and thredUP. And I think this is important because it tells us a little bit about what Jack has done in terms of his M&A background. He's cumulatively done about $20 billion worth of M&A transactions. And that's really what the crux of our conversation here today is with Jack. But I do want to just start with something that is kind of near and dear to Jack, whereby he talks a little bit about his transition from being a CFO, being in that executive leadership role, to a board role. And I think that it's really important because it gives us it sheds some color into what it is that you're looking at from different perspectives when you're doing an M&A transaction. So I think I'm going to start this first one off with, you know, when you became a CFO, and then you decided after, you know, going through several IPOs, going into a board position, what did that transition look like? And quite frankly, why did you want to go about doing that?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me here today, and thanks to the firm for having me here. Appreciate you organizing this, and hopefully people will find it helpful. I like to tell people that I have a lot of scars on my back, so it's easy to tell you stories about the things you probably shouldn't do. over the next few years of your life. So maybe we'll hit on some of those today. I was pretty fortunate. I became a CFO of a public company, acting CFO of a public company when I was 29 years old, which, as everybody knows, is not normal, nor is it really appropriate. So I have been a CFO for several decades, obviously, and in a variety of different roles, from private companies to public companies. And I've seen quite a bit. And then in my board roles, I ended up really focusing on companies that needed to go public and frankly, eventually got sold. So I've been through a lot of those IPOs and kind of the roles of being a CFO. It's, as you mature and get older and feel like you want to try something else in life, you think through a lot of things. I'm very fond of telling people that when you have an opportunity in front of you and there's an exit, you should always take some time off and do what I call opening the aperture, right? Just kind of look at everything around you, take some time for 6 months or a year, and really think about what you want to do next, right? And that's kind of what I did when we had sold Atheros to Qualcomm in 2011. I worked at Qualcomm until 2013. And in 2013, decided that I wanted to join a board, and I kind of frankly lucked into it. There was a guy who I had met many years back who tried to do a transaction with when he was running part of Silicon Labs, and eventually he moved up to CTO role, and he started going to investor conferences, and I got to know him better. We'd stop, have drinks, basically create a network relationship. And then eventually he got promoted to be the CEO of the company. He's still the CEO of the company today. And when he became CEO, he decided he wanted someone from the Valley with finance background to join his board. And so he reached out to me. So I kind of stumbled onto it, quite honestly. And I thought, this is interesting. I should try this, right? I'm a big believer in, opening the aperture and looking at new things. So I went there, I interviewed. They were kind enough to ask me to join the board. And I did. And I decided pretty much right away that I kind of liked it. And I decided to join another private company board, a company called TubeMogul, which we eventually took public and then sold to Adobe. So I was going to do this whole board thing. And then GoPro kind of stumbled into my direction through some friends who were investors in it. And I'm a big mountain biker. My kids were in high school, so it was kind of cool to have GoPro and the GoPro brand. And I just thought, hey, this would be kind of fun to do. And I thought, doing an IPO for GoPro would be kind of fun. So my plans to do boards kind of got derailed. And I went and did this role with GoPro. And we can talk about GoPro later. But one of the things that happened as part of that is I ended up being on 2 public boards at the same time as being the CFO of a public company. And I can tell you, do not do that. It sucks. It really sucks when, in particular, they were all calendar companies. So I literally would have 3 earnings basically in 1 week, right? That I had to either be the audit committee chair on, or I was the actual CFO doing the earnings. And so I learned a lesson very quickly that the board stuff's really good, but you're either doing it kind of full time, or maybe you're doing just one role as a CFO, right? One board, but don't try to do more than that because it's just too tricky. But one of the things that's really great about it, one of the reasons why it's a natural extension, is CFOs are the ones that are most commonly in the room when you're having a board meeting, right? Usually it's the CEO and the CFO talking with the board, because most of this stuff is governance and financial related. And so those are, you actually feel pretty comfortable in a boardroom as a CFO. So it is a really natural fit. And it's something that people can think about as like the last part of their career. Old people like me, we're trying to still become relevant. But it's a tricky thing to kind of work your way into. And like anything else, it's like getting your first CFO role. First one's the hardest to get.
Cool. So I think that would actually be a really cool segue. One of the things that you and I have talked about is kind of nurturing that next iteration of CFOs. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, because it's important to you. And I think, for someone like me working with the CFO, it's very helpful to kind of have that type of background as well. So I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of the importance and what it's kind of done for you as well.
Yeah, this is actually one of my big focus areas as a CFO. I think the most rewarding thing you can do as a CFO isn't to sell a company or to take it public, or frankly, even to build a really great business model. I love the building people part of building the organization. And it really is pretty critical because, frankly, those other things aren't going to happen unless you've built a good organization around you. I learned in my mid 30s when I was working at Atheros that really learned the power of a team, right? And how you need to really check your ego at the door and make it all about the group. Well, in order to do that, you've got to be constantly hiring the best people around you, right? You're always looking. I mean, it sounds very cliche, but I am always looking for people who can do my job. In theory, that would be really nice. I wouldn't have to do anything. But it takes a level of maturity to kind of get there, right? And that took me, when I was in my 20s or when I was a first-time CFO, I wasn't thinking about developing people. But once I hit kind of a comfort, I realized a comfort zone. In my 30s, I realized that by developing these great people, I was only going to build a better organization and make my job easier, quite frankly. And so one of the things I like to tell people, CFOs, all the time is every day you should be waking up and thinking about the best person you can hire. You may not be able to hire them today, but you should be thinking about that. Who's working somewhere that I've always wanted to have work for me? And, pick up the phone, call them, right? Text them, whatever. Just say, hey, how's it going? Check in. You never know when you're going to be able to hire those people. And I think if you do that, you start assembling kind of a set of people, hopefully, that will make you better, right? Atheros was a really good example of this. I had two folks that ran different parts of the organization. There was a controller who ran all the accounting organization, and then there was a head of FP&A. And they were both superstars. The controller we had hired out of Applied Materials, and Applied Materials, for some of you will know, is one of the better training grounds for finance people in the Valley. And the FP&A guy we hired just as a junior analyst, and he just shot up. In fact, we basically got rid of his boss so he could get promoted several times. So this was one of these superstar guys. And so these guys had ascended to the top of their various organizations. And one day I sat down with them and I said, look, you two are great. I'm so lucky to have you, but I want you both to be CFOs too. And so what we're going to do is you're going to switch jobs. They looked at me like my head was, like this. And, I think it was harder for the guy who was an FP&A having to do accounting, quite frankly, because that's the harder job. The guy in accounting was probably going, oh, thank God I get to do FP&A. But we sat him down and I said, look, you guys are going to make each other successful at this. You're going to show each other how to do your jobs. Well, you fast forward, those guys all became CFOs, right? And for me, that's what's really rewarding about being a CFO, is creating more CFOs. Now, it's particular point of focus for me now that I'm no longer a CFO. I'm looking to try and fix some of the diversity issues that we have in senior management. And so the only way you can do that is to try and find great women CFOs, or great women finance people, or great diverse finance candidates, and give them that chance, right? Introduce them to people where they might find an opportunity and actually get that opportunity and act on it and become a member of a team, but a diverse member of a team, because we have a problem, right? And it rolls itself all the way up to boards, right? We don't have enough diverse people on boards. So the only way I'm ever going to fix this is if we fix it at the management level. So one of the things I would tell all the CFOs out there is really focus in on how you can build great people. Because when you walk away from the company and you look back and you see that these people are doing these fantastic jobs at other companies, you're going to be so proud of the time that you invested in those people that it will all pay off and it will make you feel a lot better.
Cool. Very cool. Growing more CFOs. I like that line.
Well, I'll tell you, in the world that we're living in these days, there is definitely not enough CFOs out there. We have a real shortage. So
that is true. That is true. Okay, so I think this is the part where we get to a little bit more on the M&A piece. I would just encourage everybody out there, if you've got some questions, just chat, throw it in the chat box, and we can throw them out there. This is really kind of where I think you're gonna get some really interesting information as well. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. So
you guys can all ask better questions than Chris. So make sure.
Oh, absolutely. I'm hoping that someone will ask questions, because it can only go up. So I think let's just start with kind of talking about the difference between when you should be doing an IPO or an M&A transaction. You know, what does that look like? What in general are you kind of weighing to figure out if it's even a good option? And just think about, you know, as these companies that we're moving forward I mean, obviously the SPAC, the SPAC deals are very big deals right now, and we will discuss that at the end here. But it's one of those things, though, that we probably should be just kind of thinking about prior to, you know, just saying that we're going to do it. So what do you look at, given the fact that you've done so many, to kind of create this criteria of an M&A transaction?
Well, so the first thing everybody needs to remember is that the absolute, by far, most common exit for any company is M&A, right? IPOs get a lot of press. They're really sexy and they're fun, and you get to go stand up there at the NASDAQ and, you know, get your pictures taken, all that kind of stuff. And it's a really fun process, but the vast majority of all companies get acquired. So you as the CFO should be always prepared to actually engage in an M&A process, right? And so what does that mean? Well, to me, that means I've put a level of infrastructure in place that is appropriate for the size of the company that I'm at, right? You know, I don't want to be a $10 million company with, you know, $100 million company finance organization. That's not a good investment of resources, right? But, you know, it has the appropriate level of people in it. It has the right data that is being assembled so that you can quickly put together data rooms when that M&A opportunity does come about. It has, you've thought about things like an acquirer would think about it. When you enter into contracts, you're consistent about, you know, the types of contracts that you will and will not enter into. You know, for example, how much indemnity will you give out to someone is got to be a standard thing. What kind of credit terms do you give to people? There's a set of structural things that you want to have in place so that when an acquirer comes in, they know how you run your business, right? And they can map it against how they run their business. So always put yourself in the shoes of the acquirer and what the acquirer would actually be looking for. So that's the primary thing that I focus on. One of the vehicles to do that is your CFO monthly review packs, right? So with your team, you want to set up a package that's going to be something that you're going through on a monthly basis. It's going to go into a level of detail so you can run the business, but it's also something that you could actually use as an M&A tool should someone come in. It would be, you know, slides that you could use as a presentation for someone who's interested in acquiring the company. What you don't want to do as the CFO is be the impediment to getting that acquisition done, right? You just don't want them to come in and say, "Oh, this thing's a mess. You know, I don't want to get anywhere near this. You know, they can't even close their books. You know, they can't do this, they can't do that." So you want to get appropriately sized structure in place is what I think about. Now, when I think about an IPO, I have an acronym that those who know me have probably heard a couple of thousand times. I believe that IPO stands for I predict on target. Okay, so you may think it's initial public offering. I think it's I predict on target. And the reason I say that is that the one thing you absolutely cannot do when you go public is miss. So you go out, you go public, you miss that first quarter, that second quarter, that third quarter, you will be in the doghouse for a long, long time. And it is painful, and it is very hard to get out of that doghouse. Doghouse being the stock being very depressed. So what does that mean? You need to think about how you're going to be able to predict your business way, way in advance of being able to do that IPO. What are the indicators? For example, some of these businesses are really hard. I'm on the board of a company called thredUP. It's the largest marketplace for secondhand clothing out there. We have to predict how consumers are going to react, right? When we run a sale, what kind of volumes are we going to get? When we bring in new inventory, what kind of volumes are we going to get? And we have to actually figure out the characteristics of how our user base works. Now, we have years of activity on it, so we've come up with mechanisms to be able to predict it, right? That's a good example of why you want to wait to go public. You want to be able to build up this muscle of being able to do these kind of predictions. Other businesses, it could be really hard. I mean, if you're in a business that does a lot of your revenue on the last day of the quarter, those are the ones that scare the crap out of me the most, right? It's really hard to get comfortable that you can predict the next quarter when you barely, I know businesses that have 50% of their business done in the last week of a quarter. I mean, I wouldn't want to go public with a business like that, right? To me, that's a sell the business type business. So I think there's a variety of things you've got muscle that you got to get in place in order to be a public company. You also need to know how to talk to investors and a bunch of things you can learn along the way. But really the key part is being able to tell your story with concise metrics that are very predictable. What I tell all of my private companies, they start giving you this pitch on why they're such a great company. And what I try to remind them is put yourself in the shoes of a buy-side investor. The buy-side investor has a choice of thousands of stocks they can look at on any day. And you want them to look at you. So if you overcomplicate things, it's never going to work, right? So I always tell folks, they remember two things about you, your ticker and one other thing. Whatever that one other thing is, you better make it really, really important.
I like it.
Well, a good example of this, Chris, is Zoom. Okay, everybody knows ZM and pandemic. Okay, and so that's why Zoom goes to the roof, right? Now they have to be able to predict their business too, which is a little crazy in a pandemic. But they effectively went public at a very good time for that.
I have one follow-up question. Were you ever in the proverbial SEC doghouse?
Not the SEC doghouse, but I have definitely been in the buy-side doghouse. I have done 65 quarters as a public company CFO. I like to say there will never be a 66th. I think I've missed the quarter 3 times, and every single one of those is extremely painful, right? And one time I definitely got in the doghouse. Actually, it was a Theros. We missed the 3rd quarter out second quarter out after going public. It was a semiconductor correction. There was nothing we could do about it. So it wasn't really our fault, but we were newly public and we missed our numbers. So our stock, I think we went public at 14, stock went down to 6. Yeah, I bought a lot at 6, so it was good.
That's good. There was some benefit to it. All right.
We did sell the company for $45, so it was probably okay in the long run.
Sounds like you did all right. All right, I got a couple of questions that are rolling in now.
Cool.
What did Jack look for when deciding to go for an IPO, private versus private equity owned companies?
Well, I have a very simple approach. I actually use the same approach for boards too. So the number one thing I care about when I'm looking at a company to go in as an operator is who's my boss, right? So knowing your boss in advance is a huge advantage, right? If you don't know your boss in advance, do a lot of homework. One of the things, believe it or not, one of the things I used to do as a CFO coming into a new company is ask my boss for references. Because I'm going to give my boss references on me so that he knows what I'm like. But, it's just as important to know that I can work with this person, right? And the right boss will take it the right way, quite frankly, right? And you're not going to find out anything too negative in those references, most likely. He's going to give you some important people that like him or her. And you're going to make those phone calls, but it's going to be a way for you to learn about that boss, right? So I need to learn about my dog too, apparently.
I was wondering if that was your dog. That's
my boss.
COVID right there. COVID.
Yeah, he's my boss. So.
Okay. Got another one here for you.
Wait a second. I see one that just came. What kind of dog do I have? He's a mutt. He's a mutt. In fact, it's worse than that. We got him from a rescue place, and we were told he was a Labrador. If you didn't know, there's actually a service you can go to. I think it's called Wisdom, where you can do the DNA test on your dog. My dog has 0 lab in it. He's like all shepherds.
It sounds like you might be on the next board over there, possibly.
No, I got enough going on.
Yeah. All right, I got another one here for you. When approaching potential M&A, monthly reporting and financial packages are important, but what do you monitor on a weekly or daily basis?
Yeah, so this is where I think the CFO's job has changed a lot in the last 20 years. First of all, I am front and center with customers as much as humanly possible. I believe in particularly, to the extent you can do it in a D2C business, that's a little bit tougher to do. But in a lot of these B2B businesses, you can actually get out there and take responsibility for client accounts, right? Work with the salespeople from some of these different places. And frankly, you're going to learn a lot by just doing that. And, when they have problems, they're going to call you, right? So I'd like to take the pulse of the customer quite a bit. And I think it's really important to do that. Secondarily, I love to run or at least have influence over sales operations within a company. Sales operations is kind of like the back room of how everything gets done in a company. So you learn everything through sales operations. If you're short on orders, or you're short on demand, or you're short on supply, it's actually going to show up in sales operations. If you're a software company trying to get things closed at the end of a quarter, all those deals are going to be going through sales operations. So know the sales operations folks well. If they don't report to you, that's fine. Just make sure that that person is your best friend. So I do that quite a bit. And then, of course, I have all sorts of little things that I'm doing. A lot of my focus is on revenue at any one time. And then for OpEx, what I try to do is instill simple rules for people so that I don't have to, I don't want to be the OpEx cop, right? But what I do want you to do is understand what the impact of your decision is. I'll give you a good example. At one of my companies, I told them, I tried to explain to them the impact of the spending that they were doing, and they weren't getting it. So I translated it into EPS. And so what that meant was every time you spent $500,000, that was 1 penny of earnings for us. And if you know that that 1 penny of earnings is going to trade at a 20 times multiple, and then you can multiply it by the number of shares you have, you're going to act in a different way when it comes to OpEx. And that way, I don't have to be there being the cop that's overseeing everything that you're doing. You're realizing that, hey, I need to think twice about spending that money. Even if I've got it budgeted, maybe I need to think twice about spending that money if it's going to cost me another penny of earnings, right? So I think putting in rules like that, where you just make it more digestible for people in the company, I've found that if you do that, they tend to act in a good way.
Great. I have a question here from Sean Dockery. How did you navigate managing people in areas that you had less proficiency, I need to go back to college. Apparently I can't read very well. But yeah, how did you navigate managing people in areas that you had less proficiency in?
Yeah, so I don't know if that's managing directly or managing indirectly, but let's kind of address both of them, I guess. Look, I grew up I was an accounting major from the finest institution in the Bay Area, Santa Clara University. So I was an accounting major in college. I worked in public accounting for 5 years, which is probably 3 years longer than I ever thought I would. And then I got into corporate America. So when I came into corporate America, I was a budget guy, and I was responsible for building the budgets at Electronics for Imaging. And eventually I got promoted to controller and then promoted to acting CFO. It was really interesting along the way because you start picking up all these things that you've never managed. For example, I managed customer service at EFI. I had no idea how to manage customer service, right? I managed tech support at EFI and didn't have any background in that. What I found is it's like anything else. You have to just take a step back and listen to people. Usually these organizations are going to have really good people in them. And you search to find those leaders that are really good. And if you do that, then you can just kind of suck their brains for a while and learn about what works and what doesn't work, and then how you can help them, right? So I really believe it's a listening exercise in many ways to go into these organizations. And then eventually you'll probably get the same organization multiple times. Like, I've run operations quite a few times. I happen to really like operations. I probably like it more than finance. And what I've learned is, over the years, I've gotten some really great operations leaders that I could learn from. And now I've actually developed a proficiency in it. I still think that there's much better operating guys out there or gals out there than me, but at least I've kind of sucked people's brains and found the things that work and don't work. The place where this doesn't work is if you don't have good people in the organization, right? And if so, you really just have to make some quick changes in those organizations, even if you don't know how to run them, right? You just gotta have, it's all about people. Everything is all about having the right people behind you or in front of you, frankly. And if you do that, then you're gonna learn a ton, and it's actually pretty easy. The only thing I've never run is engineering, and I don't think I'm qualified to do that. So I try to stay away from that one.
That might be worse than finance.
I would love to do it. I'm just not that smart.
Sorry to any engineers on here. Okay, so let's jump in here a little bit to some of the IPO stuff. Maybe let's just talk about this real quick. What are some of the main issues that you've seen that have maybe delayed or prohibited transactions? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Usually it's the performance of the business. I mean, it's really two things that really stop or start IPOs. The overall economic uncertainty or lack thereof around you. Like right now, the next person who walks down the street here in front of me could probably take a company public. I mean, it is ridiculous how easy it is to get a company public right now. So the overall environment's good. It's not, I mean, you could be shrinking and probably take a company public. So it's a very, very rare time. So timing matters a lot. And I had a company that wanted to go public, and the market crashed on them, and they had to wait another quarter, right? So sometimes it's out of your control, right? There are other things that keep you from going public. Quite frankly, the team and infrastructure is one of them. I have multiple companies that have gone public in the last few years that the audits, for example, have been the long pole in the tent, right? Because normally you're doing an AICPA audit leading up, and now all of a sudden you got to turn on the spigot to do a PCAOB audit, which by the way is very expensive and takes some time to get done. You've got to get the control environment in place. You've got to document all your technical, all your policies, et cetera. So a lot of the time, an IPO can happen, the desired IPO can happen really quickly. And then we in finance have to kind of step it up and turn on the afterburners to get all this stuff in place. So don't be surprised if your finance is the long pole in the tent, but we try to just make sure we still can get the company out in a reasonable time period. I've seen other things happen where, quite frankly, some companies don't get a board together fast enough with independent board members. Other companies will not have management team members filled. There's a lot of stuff that can happen, but the most common I would say, are the infrastructure not being in place fast enough and just the market environment changing right around you.
Okay, great. I have a couple other questions here. One is from a buddy of yours over from the Atheros time, but I'm gonna come back to that one, Kevin, if you don't mind, and we'll probably hit that one at the end here. I have another question here from Dale. Have you ever had to change the entire culture of a company, and if so, how did you go about doing it?
Yeah. No is the answer. And
Okay.
I'm actually quite proud of that answer, because that means I assessed the culture of the company correctly when I took the job. And so that's the lesson to really learn, is that you really want to do the homework up front before you take a job, right? Um, I never wanted to go to a company for a year or two, right? I actually was only at GoPro for 2.5 years, but that was actually pre-discussed before I ever took the job, because I was retired at the time. But I like to think that I didn't have to change the culture anywhere, because the CEOs that I had the opportunity to work for were so incredibly strong and such good leaders, right? I will say I've had many arguments over the strategy of where the company is going, with CEOs and board members and management team members over the years. But those are healthy, right? That's part of getting to the right direction. But culture-wise, no. In fact, ironically, one of the reasons I took the job at GoPro, this is an interesting story. I met Nick, and we hit it off. He's a great guy. And I wanted to see some of the other people in the management team. So I went in to go do some interviews in the office in San Mateo. And the day I got there, I walked up to the front desk, and all the power in the campus was out. Somebody had run into a light pole right out in front of the campus building, and all the power was out. And so I watched how people operated in an environment that was not normal. It was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted to see, right? So the receptionist is on her cell phone trying to track down the people that I'm supposed to be talking to. And people are running all around trying to figure out, who's doing what. There's no light in certain parts of the building. Everything was crazy, but everybody was working together. And to me, that was a really positive sign. Not that, someone ran over a light pole and there was no power, just that these people had this culture of kind of working through tough things and doing it in a good, positive way. And so that was actually a big reason why I actually ended up taking the job there. So I think I look for stuff like that. Take your time in the process of looking at an opportunity, because it's an investment, and you don't get that many of them during your lifetime. You really want to invest in being with the right people.
Okay, great. I'm gonna bring us back to the M&A piece just a little bit here. This is kind of one of my questions. As an accounting firm, we see a lot of different transactions happening. We do a lot of inorganic, organic things as well. But I'm curious, when you go down this road of M&A activity, are you looking at things like financial software integration? Are you looking at cultural integration? Are you looking at brands? I mean, how important is a brand to you when you're kind of going down this road? Is it a utility versus a perception? I mean, what are those things that you're really looking at when you're getting involved in something like this?
So let's take the kind of the meaty financial type stuff first. Yes, I care a lot about systems. And when we want to acquire a company, I in most cases I'm going to integrate you into whatever we are doing, right? So if you are doing something similar, using similar systems to what we're using, that is a huge plus. Because when you look at M&A, look, most M&A fails. And I believe the primary reason why M&A fails is because people are really bad at integration, right? And so integration can really get ugly when like systems aren't working. For example, I remember I had one M&A transaction I did where we couldn't ship product for 3 weeks after we closed on it. It's horrible, right? It's a really bad morale situation for the people in the company that's acquired. Obviously, I wanted the revenue, so that wasn't working. So I think systems are really important to me when I'm going through it. Not necessarily because I'm going to use your system, but I need to see at least a bridge to how I can map you into what we're doing, right? Culture, absolutely, probably the most important thing to me. At each of the companies that I worked at when we did M&A, there was a person in our company that I just called the cultural Yoda, right? And I would pull them along with us on M&A transactions we were looking at. And they would sit there. By the way, I'm a big believer in, if you're going to do M&A of a company, go to their office. Don't let them come to you. Go to their office. You want to see how they operate in their office environment. You want to see people walking by. You want to see how hard people are working. You want to take in the things around you to see what the culture of the place is actually like. But I would bring somebody, we always had somebody in the company who could really kind of tell the pulse of how this company would operate and how that would map back into what we were doing. And generally, we were pretty good at that at each of the companies that I was at. The times in which we made exceptions usually ended badly, right? So I think the cultural piece is a really, really big deal.
Great. And I don't mean to belabor this, but I am curious about the brand side of things. Is that something that you guys are really looking at when you go down this road, or are you strictly looking at a utility behind it?
It depends. On some of my consumer focused company, yeah, I care about the brand, but it's still usually going to be trumped by the brand that we have, because by definition, we're going to be the larger company, right? So I would say brand is important, but not critical to my consumer companies. To my just kind of standard tech companies, not really. I mean, I care about your technology. How are we going to turn this product into something that's going to scale at 10 times the rate of what you're scaling it at, right? How do I take what you're doing, put it in my channels, and make for a multiplier effect that's good for both of us?
Okay. So you talked about timing of an IPO. That might be a really good transition into kind of your GoPro IPO. I think that is an interesting case study, and it is a little spirited, right? So I'd love to hear about that. I think a lot of people would love to hear your story there too.
Yeah, if you're going to come out of retirement to do an IPO, you might as well do one that's a little crazy. So my theory behind going to GoPro was quite simple. I was a big GoPro user. I'm a mountain biker, and I use it when I'm mountain biking. I thought, wow, this is a really powerful brand. Nick had built a really good company. He built it up to 985 million. And I was so thankful for this because he was under $1 billion and I didn't have to do socks. So he built it up to 985 million in revenue. I mean, it was just incredibly well done. Company was basically $1 billion company, 20% operating profit. It looked really great. And I told Nick, I said, look, I'll do this because this is the easiest IPO I could ever do. If you think about who buys a GoPro, it's males with money who are very active. That's the primary demographic. Well, that is the definition of a portfolio manager in a buy-side fund. So I knew that I was going to be able to go to these guys and pitch them a story that they were just going to be able to relate to like that, right? Because they're probably all GoPro owners. And so to me, I had good numbers. I had a good demographic. This was a sales thing, right? Could we get it done? So we went out and we did it. And actually, we priced the IPO exactly $1 off where I had originally thought when I accepted the job. I had to do back of the envelope math to see if it was economically made sense to do this. And we priced it $1 off what I thought it would be at the IPO, which was mind-blowing. I don't think I've ever been that close before. And so we went public at $24. It traded at $30 at the end of the first day, which is pretty much a perfect IPO. You want it to go up, but not too much, right? Next thing I know, the stock was at 90. And basically investors had gotten the investor base was a retail investor base. It was the old school version of GameStop, right? So, thing had just gone wildly out of control, and there was nothing you could do to to fix it. We were trading hundreds of millions of dollars. In some cases, we traded, I think, $500 million of stock in certain days, which was mind blowing, right? Market cap had gone to $15 billion. It was all great. What we did was we were able to get a secondary out, raise some money for the company, get some secondary shares sold for some of the investors, and we were able to monetize it in a good, positive way. But along the way, we actually, we had this series of products we were going to introduce that were going to make GoPro just continue to grow. First was the Hero 4, we're on the Hero 9 now. Hero 4 we introduced in October, right after a June IPO, took off. Our revenue took off. I think we did 1.3 billion that first year after being public. The next year we had a really cool new product. In fact, I actually have one here now I think about it. So this, for those of you who may not remember it, is called the Gopro Session. And it doesn't look like a normal GoPro. It's square, it's small, has one button on the top. I thought this was the coolest product in the world. Ends up, I was the only one who thought this was the coolest product in the world. And, we ran into all sorts of working capital issues, sales slowed down, we confused the consumer. And we really just got to a point where it was really challenging for us to make some decisions that needed to be made. Many of you may remember GoPro was working on drones at the time. We were working on a media business. We were doing way too many things. So a lot of the discussions we were having back then was about, what can we do well and what should we not be doing, right? It's classic. This happens in a lot of companies that go public. They go public, they think they're great, and they just start doing too much stuff. So it was a good lesson learned. Stock came back down to earth, and no longer at 90 bucks. It had come down into the 20s, I think, even into 15 at one point. And so I saw the ups and the downs, and I learned a lot about retail investors during that time. And I learned the lessons of not being focused in a consumer company. So I have since taken a lot of those lessons, and I really tried to help a lot of these consumer hardware companies. I've had many discussions. I have a really nice PowerPoint about all the things that we did wrong, right? And I made a lot of those decisions. So all the things I did wrong. And it was a good learning experience is what I took from it.
That's actually a really good segue to this next question. I have a question here saying our company is moving towards an IPO. As a CFO, what are the critical things that the CFO needs to be prepared for? It's a softball question for you, Jack.
Well, it is different for every company, though. First of all, again, get your organization in place. If you don't have your organization, nothing else is possible. That means really solid accounting, right? You want a controller or a chief accounting officer or someone in a position like that where you don't have to focus on, can I close the books, right? It happens. I like to tell people you get hired as a CFO because you're really good at creative financial transactions and doing IPOs and all that kind of stuff. You get fired because the books don't close correctly, right? So get your house in order, number one. Number two, start thinking about what the messaging is over a multi-year period to the street, right? We're going public as X, but we're going to be Y in the future, right? And develop the metrics that are going to allow an investor to see that progression over time. An example here is when we went public at Atheros, we had built this thing, you guys may have heard of this, called Wi-Fi, right? So Wi-Fi chips, they became probably a little more popular than I ever thought they were going to be. But we knew that we had a really good business in retail. And retail was like, you go buy your Linksys router, your Netgear router, and you bring Wi-Fi into your home, right? And that's what we all did back in the early 2000s, right? That's how we got Wi-Fi. We knew that people were going to start putting it into laptops next, right? So we created a segment that, not a accounting segment, but a disclosable set of numbers that were related to PCs. We also had this tiny little piece of business that was related to consumer. And consumer we defined as TVs and maybe even someday phones, right? And that was like 2 or 3% of our revenue when we first went public. Well, we were able to tell this story of how it was going to actually go up and to the right. And obviously consumer Wi-Fi is a big deal now. Your televisions, your phones, that's where a lot of the volume is. And so we thought about it well in advance. We were kind of skating to the puck. And the puck gets moved and the rink gets moved every once in a while. So you're not always right, but you want to have some forward thinking about where you're going, set up metrics so that the street can actually understand that you're making progress towards where you're going. And if you do that, it makes the story a heck of a lot easier.
Cool. Let's see, I'm just trying to see if I've got a couple other questions here. Have you ever been in a company and considered doing an MBO when the stock is pretty far down?
Doing an MBO.
Yeah, I'm not. That might not be the right. No, that's what it says. I'm not sure what that is.
So
managed buyout. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. I've been in all of these situations. Thank you, Dale. I am looking, let's put it this way. I think you should do whatever is right for your shareholders, period. And this is my life right now as a board member. If you think about being a board member, all you really care about, the things you're focused on are hiring and firing a CEO and capital allocation. Really, that's it. Right? Everything else is management needs to run the company. And so capital allocation is a management buyout, right? And, if you have an extended period of time where management is not operating the business correctly, or maybe you just have macro events, then, you need to think about these things because it is good for the shareholders in the long term. However, if management has a good plan for getting you out of the mess that you're in, I like to generally give them some rope to do that first, right? If they can't do it, I still would probably prefer to swap out the management team before actually just doing a management buyout type situation. But, in some cases, that might be the right option too. It is more rare, but it is something you can consider. You should be considering all situations.
We got about 6 minutes left here, Jack. So what I am curious about is, you could probably answer this in like 30 seconds. So this is the question about SPACs. Are they a good idea or are they a bad idea?
That's a complicated one. Okay, well, good thing this is being recorded and you can use it against me in about 5 years. Look, I think the evolution of a SPAC is actually a very productive thing. I think what we've found is that SPACs have been around for a long time, and they are not a routine way to actually create liquidity, but it is a way you can do it. The thing that I thought SPACs are pretty shady until we started seeing the pipes go with the SPACs. Pipes were a really good addition to the SPAC process because no longer is it me as the sponsor saying this is what your company's worth. It's a Fidelity or a Wellington or a T Rowe or someone who does this for a living, invests in stocks. They're actually giving some credence to the valuations. That being said, I personally believe it's one of the biggest bubbles we will see in our lifetime. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't take advantage of that, right? I took a company public in 1999, December of 1999. We raised $350 million on, I think, like 8 million in revenue. Okay, so yeah, so we took advantage of the market, right? And so you as a CFO have to look at those options and say, is this a viable path for me? But do know that there are a lot of SPACs out there that will probably never fund the de-SPACing process that they want to do. Just last week we had 15 new SPACs. It's crazy to think about that, right? So I do think it's a bubble, but I think it's a viable option for companies to be considering if you're looking for a way to raise big amounts of money. I will tell you my biggest fear with this is that we are now introducing public investing into the venture capital market, basically. Things that are really far out there, people who have the next great battery technology or the next great EV solution. These solutions are going to take a long time. And normally they're germinated inside a company with venture capital money that is very capable of taking the right risk for that type of situation. Public investors, unfortunately, for the last 10 years, the market's been, other than March of last year, the market's basically been up and to the right. And so they just don't think you can lose. And I got news for you. You can lose. And I think that's what's going to happen with some of these SPACs.
Okay. Let's see here. I have another question here that I think might be a good one to kind of end on. We have a question saying, how do you recommend a strong external finance leader with limited ability to gain access to that experience transition into their next senior or executive finance role?
Find a mentor. So find someone who believes in you and will work with you. I believe that let's put it this way. When I was 29 years old, I was not qualified to do the job that I was doing. And the first thing I did was call everybody I knew, right? I'm like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I found people who wanted to help me. You'll be shocked if you just ask people that you've met along the way for help. Most people are good people and they actually do want to help you, right? So I would find a mentor very quickly. And look for someone who's actually done some of this stuff that you want to do. You'll be surprised. I think that they can help you out a lot more than you think.
Cool. I have one other person here, Kevin. I'm going to kill his last name, but it's SHIH. He's an old Atheros friend. Yes. And this is actually a really good way to end this. He goes, how do you enjoy your semi-retired life, which it really doesn't sound like you're retired at all. But what is your preference now? Still stay semi-retired or come back to work?
Yeah, so Kevin, good to hear from you. I hope you're well. Kevin did a lot of great work for us at Atheros, so appreciate that. A lot of hard work, including all the international stuff. It's the way I describe it to people is as follows. It's an awesome job to be a CFO. It really is. I mean, it's hard, but it's really fun. And the fun part about it, and Kevin will remember this well, is what I call landing the plane on the aircraft carrier, right? Every quarter you got to kind of come in and grab that rope and land that plane right where it needs to go. And you get to do it with a team of people, and it's really quite a lot of fun. However, sometimes the plane does go off the aircraft carrier and goes into the ocean, and you got to go fetch it. And that's not so much fun. And I don't really want to do that again. So I have made a decision that I really just want to continue doing what I'm doing. And the benefits of what I'm doing are more, I get to work with a lot of companies and really help out in ways I probably never thought I could. And so while I love the thrill of being in an operating role, and frankly, I miss the team part of it the most because I just love working with great people I can learn from. I think my time is probably passed on that.
Perfect. I don't know if there's any better way to end this. I'm sure there's probably quite a few people here that might be interested in connecting with you. Is it okay that they connect up on LinkedIn or something?
Yeah, you need my email to do it. It's jacklazar@gmail.com.
Okay. I mean, you work for, still 17, 18 different companies now, so probably all different emails. I'm not sure, but
Gmail is my infrastructure. So.
All right. So first of all, I really want to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy person, and I really appreciate you just kind of walking through some of this knowledge. I think a lot of the people on the phone here also or on the Zoom are also very appreciative, even though we can't hear them. But it's just been a pleasure to have you in this conversation, and hopefully you'll be able to do this with me one day in the future when you've actually retired, and you can go back and look at what what you did all in the past. So, but until then, I really appreciate you taking the time, Jack.
No problem. Thanks for having me. And just remember, everybody, it's about the people. So build your relationships, build your networks. People will make you better, and they will make your organizations better. So just make the investment there.
All right, words to live by. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And you guys have a great day. Thank you again, Jack.